In 1978, a small group of Michigan-based teens shot a $1,600 short film called Within the Woods as a proof of concept for a horror feature that would initially be titled Book of the Dead. After many months of pounding the pavement, seeking investors from friends of family, and dentists, they were finally able to secure $90,000 to begin filming their feature in a remote, dilapidated cabin in rural Tennessee. What followed was a grueling period that would test the strengths of the inexperienced cast and crew, led by their lunatic leader, a visionary new director with nothing more than an 8mm camera and a dream. The director was Sam Raimi. The movie was Evil Dead. What's up, beautiful people? I'm Zach, and you're watching Zach Makes Movies, the channel where we talk about...
You guessed it, Frank Stallone.
We talk about all kinds of movies on this channel, but in October, we talk about one kind of movie. Over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about Halloween and A Nightmare on Elm Street. And today I want to talk about another classic of horror cinema, Sam Raimi's masterpiece, The Evil Dead. But despite what it may seem, as there is only one person in this video, I want this to be an open communication. So if you have anything to add in the comments, please feel free to do so. If I miss anything, I have the memory of a goldfish, so there's probably many details that I have not remembered about this film series. And whoever has the most interesting factoids about the movie franchise will be pinned at the top. And if you have any issues with anything that I'm saying in these videos, feel free to subscribe and write mean comments. It actually helps the algorithm, so thank you. More so than almost any other franchise in the history of cinema, this film changed everything. It not only created a new subgenre of horror in the cabin in the woods style of filmmaking, but it inspired an entire generation of young filmmakers to pick up a camera, go out into the woods, and make a movie on their own. Growing up in Detroit outside of Hollywood, Sam Raimi had to rely on friends who were also interested in film and acting. Some continued to attempt for a Hollywood career after the success of Evil Dead. Most moved on to normal jobs. But then, there's Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell is a legend unlike any other. You've seen him in nearly all of Sam Raimi's movies. You may recognize him from the Spider-Man trilogy. You may recognize him from Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
It's over!
But most likely, you will remember him as Ash from the Evil Dead series. This big-chinned, unibrowed heartthrob jumped right off the screen and into the hearts of horror fans everywhere the moment Evil Dead hit cinemas. By the second film, in 1987, he had become a horror icon. He continued to evolve in the third of the trilogy, Army of Darkness.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. This is my boomstick. You can find this in the sporting goods department. That's right. Shop smart. Shop S-smart. You got that?
But personally, I think he really came into his own just a few years ago in one of my favorite TV series of all time, Ash vs. Evil Dead.
Evil was always waiting in the shadows, and only one man would rise to stand against it.
Yeah, looking good. Looking sweet.
But we'll talk about that another time. Today I wanted to talk about the first two movies in particular, Evil Dead 1 and 2. There's a lot of confusion as to the continuity of the first two movies. Many people think that Evil Dead 2 is a straight-up sequel. Others think it's a reboot. In reality, it's somewhere in between. Sam Raimi did not own the rights to the first Evil Dead movie, so he had to recreate the first one in order to get into the second one. But why don't we let Bruce Campbell explain it?
People think that Ash, the character Ash, was stupid enough to go back to the cabin with a new group of friends. We didn't own the rights to our own movie that was done by New Line Cinema. The second movie was done by Dino De Laurentiis. We couldn't get the rights to our own movie, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. So we just shot a recap with different actors, but people thought, he's coming back to the same cabin with these new people? What? So there's a big debate of is Evil Dead 2 a remake or a sequel? It's a requel. So if you really want to do it right, you take the first Evil Dead up to where the evil entity hits me, cut off all the recap, go right into Ash being thrown through the trees at the beginning, lands, play the movie. It would all make perfect sense.
Now, going back to Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead is famous for a lot of reasons, but the most obvious is a style of cinematography, and for the last 30 years, it has been affectionately... 40 years, Jesus. And for the last 40 years, it has been affectionately attributed as Evil Dead Cam. I have tried to utilize this style of filmmaking many, many times in my own projects, as recently as my latest horror short, A Night in the Swamp. This style of cinematography is used throughout the film series, and was done without the use of expensive drones. It's a brilliant technique, and it immediately sets the tone of the movie. You feel as though, as opposed to just a random roaming shot, you're actually witnessing the point of view of the demons, which adds to the fun and the horror of the film.
4 of hearts, 8 of spades, 2 spades.
The makeup effects may seem rudimentary, but they're perfect, and even to this day, they're causing friends of mine to vomit horribly. All these years later, these cakey makeup effects still hold up. It feels ghoulish, it feels otherworldly, it feels a little bit off, and that's what this whole franchise is all about. The first movie is mostly horror. There's a little bit of comedy here and there.
Don't let the noise fool you, girls. This thing is solid as a rock.
But what's probably most memorable from this movie is the basement. This is a tiny little cellar that was carved out underneath the cabin, and it is incredibly effective and absolutely horrifying. This particular scene has been giving me nightmares for years.
Cheryl?
The movie ends with an incredibly iconic shot that tells us that the horror is far from over. There are no rules, and there is no escape. Sam Raimi used the lore of the Necronomicon, which he had discovered in the work of H.P. Lovecraft. The Necronomicon Ex Mortis has been used many times since, and is entirely attributed now to The Evil Dead, even though it actually predates the movie by quite some time. The Evil Dead series came into my life long before I even knew what it was. This story that I'm about to tell begins one of the most horrifying experiences of my childhood. When I was about 9 years old, I was at a sleepover at a friend's house. It was not monitored by adults, so left in charge of a good dozen 9-year-olds was my friend Andy's older brother. After allowing us to watch a series of Adam Sandler films that my parents weren't particularly thrilled about, I was, Andy's brother decided it was story time. We all gathered around in our sleeping bags, and he told us a tale about a haunted deer head. A young boy had a deer head mounted on his wall, and every night it would come to life, turn its head with a creak, and watch you as you slept. And then, when it got real quiet, the deer would begin to call your name. Zach, Zach. I was terrified. Fortunately, I was able to survive through the night, and the next morning I got back to my parents' house, and my dad was very excited to tell me that he had a surprise for me. He led me upstairs into my bedroom, where on the wall was a newly mounted deer head. I didn't tell him about the story. I just cowered in fear, night after night, year after year, in fear of the deer. Years later, I thought I'd gotten over it. I'd nearly forgotten about this chapter of my life. And then finally, as a teenager, I saw Evil Dead. And shortly after, I saw Evil Dead 2. And to my surprise... But enough about my childhood trauma. I'm sure that had no effect on my genre of filmmaking. The recordings found in the basement are just so beautifully recorded.
It's only been a few hours since I've translated and spoken aloud the first of the demon resurrection passages from the Book of the Dead. And now I fear that my wife has become host to a Kandarian demon. May God forgive me for what I have unleashed unto this earth. I could not bring myself to dismember her corpse. I buried her in the cellar. God help me, I buried her in the earthen floor of the fruit cellar.
The idea of demons being playful and tricking you into thinking that they've left the host and now, oh, she's normal again, she's okay, is so overused at this point that it's hard to remember that it wasn't really a thing before Evil Dead. Not in this way. It's incredibly disturbing, and it's incredibly smart. It's almost reminiscent of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you see what looks to be your friend, and you don't know for sure whether it actually is them or not. Oh, my girlfriend's okay. I thought she was a demon, but now she's promising me that she's alright. And the horror just ramps up and up and up throughout the movie. The aesthetics of the cabin are fantastic. Despite the amount of trouble they went through, Bruce Campbell tells a story in his autobiography, If Chins Could Kill, which I highly recommend. He narrates it himself on Audible. That's not a sponsorship, by the way. No one is paying me. He talks about the makeup effects being toxic and dangerous. He had to leave his makeup effects on overnight because of how much trouble it was to actually put it on, and he ended up developing a skin condition. The eye effects could only be left in for about 5 minutes at a time for safety reasons. So all of the effect shots that you see in the movie are endangering these 20-something-year-olds for your entertainment. The movie made its money back and then some, but we didn't get a sequel until 1987 when Sam Raimi released Evil Dead 2, which is generally universally seen as the greatest film in the trilogy. It accomplishes everything that was accomplished in the first Evil Dead and more. What you see in the sequel is a massive elevation of comedy. Sam Raimi is a very goofy guy, and by making Evil Dead 1 without any humor in it, more or less, he's directing with one arm tied behind his back. Evil Dead 2 is a very funny movie. It is about a group of people losing their minds, particularly Bruce Campbell as Ash. And shots like this are as gif-worthy as any I've ever seen. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, these guys were huge fans of the Three Stooges, huge fans of old cartoons, Looney Tunes, and that is the vein that runs through this movie and everything that came after it. The cinematography is even better in the sequel, the acting is better, the effects are better, the scares are better, and the many fake shemps are better. Evil Dead 2 leads right into Army of Darkness, which provides for an incredibly unique cliffhanger ending for the second film. and sets the stage for a completely different setting for the third film. Army of Darkness is incredibly fun. It's not quite as scary as the other two films. There's even more comedy in Army of Darkness than there is in Evil Dead 2, but there are just as many iconic moments. At this point, we've established Bruce Campbell's trademark line.
Groovy.
And we get a new one.
Give me some sugar, baby.
All three of these films are filmmaking masterclasses in very different ways. But if you want to be a horror filmmaker and you don't have a lot of money, I highly recommend checking out at least the first two movies. And if you don't want to watch the third one by the time you finish the second, maybe horror isn't for you. Sam Raimi is a maniac. Bruce Campbell talks in his book about how he would constantly fuck with him. Sam Raimi very much enjoys torturing his friends, but he's very good to other actors. It's strange to think that Sam Raimi went on to make the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy after Evil Dead, but if you watch closely, you can see his signature directing style throughout. I love Evil Dead, I love Sam Raimi, I love Bruce Campbell, and I love Ash vs. Evil Dead so much that might have to be its own video entirely, which we'll get to eventually. If you haven't seen it and you're a fan of Evil Dead, I highly recommend it. It's got Lucy Lawless from Xena Warrior Princess. If you have any recommendations for movies to talk about on the channel, please let me know in the comments below. And if you want more content like this, you can check out this video and this video. Thanks so much, happy Halloween, and stay groovy.